is and ought only to be the slave of passions, said philosopher David Hume. Who is this guy? Why do we care about him? Well, he was the philosopher who suggested that through this quote, that morality was based on sentiment, passion, emotion, rather than logic and reasoning alone. And in a world where polarity is plaguing the media and politics, mangling the ethics discussed by the masses, doesn't that give us a good insight into all of this? Is it really that simple for us to rely on our emotions? Well, I mean, after all of the war, the fighting, the bloodlust, I personally don't think it's a closed case. Not to mention that our dear David was faced with criticism on this standpoint of ethics because of the very factor, the subjectivity that follows all human emotion. Some can be used for a greater cause, while others can only be used to spread hatred. So, what emotions should and shouldn't we consider? Should we consider all emotions and put more focus on the role that they play in our beliefs and moral compass? An unknown is introduced. Ethics isn't all uncertain, sure. You don't have to remind your baby boy Timmy every morning to not commit a felony while you're giving him breakfast, with eggs and toast, his favorite. I can't fully answer the question of what ethics should and shouldn't be purely based on that alone, though. There are some, ethics throughout the past 100 years has changed so drastically, we don't know what the ethics of the future will be. But what I can answer is how we've subtly trusted the social construct of ethics without much question, and maybe I want to add on how we can give it more thought. Let's open up with Exhibit A. Now, hold on. I will let that stand over there. That is an inflatable clown, and this is the closest replica we could find to that. Now, an experiment would call this the Bobo doll, but before we can continue in that discussion, can we have a volunteer from the audience? Anyone? Yeah, that works. Now, you're the star of the show for half a minute. Take the hammer, do whatever you want. Yeah, of course. I don't mind. Okay. Thank you so much. Release your anger healthily. Now, thank you so much. Bless your soul. Don't be too embarrassed by the next segment. But funny thing, this is actually similar to what was done by these children in the Bobo doll experiment. What is this though? What am I talking about? What is the Bobo doll experiment? Let me explain that to you in just a bit. Now I'm sure the psychology students in the crowd may know this, but the Bobo doll experiment was conducted by Albert Bandura, which contributed to the observational learning concepts in psychology. Now, the experiment design is pretty simple. There was a separation of children into 3 groups: a non-aggressive model group, a control group, and an aggressive model group. Now, first of all, they were all brought to a room with a bunch of toys and then told they weren't allowed to play with them. This made them a little irked, and then off in the different batches they went. Now, the non-aggressive model group was brought to observe an adult nicely playing with the Bobo doll. The aggressive model group was brought to a room to see some random man come in, punch the Bobo doll relentlessly, and beat whatever life was behind those beady eyes. And then the control group had neither of those instances. Then all 3 groups were brought to a different room, to which they were surrounded by toys, and you guessed it, the Bobo doll. The non-aggressive model was shown to be the least violent. The control group was only slightly irked, but relatively calm in comparison. You get the main gist. The main part is the Bobo doll and how the aggressive model acted toward it. Now, the kids who witnessed the aggressiveness acted accordingly to their models of aggression, boys physically abusing the doll and girls verbally abusing it instead. More importantly, 40% of those kids who witnessed the aggressive model carried out those traits later on. Let me put this in perspective. Let's say there's 100 children in this room. 40 people would walk out with those aggressive characteristics that they could use to harm others and still distress themselves. Kids are very influential. I'm sure many of you are parents in the crowd. You will all would agree to that. However, so I'm sure you all agree that this kind of influential behavior, this sort of aggressive behavior shouldn't be exposed to them in such a way that it is encouraging it. Then again, if we also didn't have this experiment, we wouldn't have made such developments in the social cognitive learning theory in psychology. Now, this is just the influence of an unethical act and how it can impact a child. Though, did anyone notice what I said earlier? When I allowed the audience to do anything with the Bobo doll, I silently nudged them to do something violent by giving them the toy hammer. There was something quite similar done in the past too. Let's open up with Exhibit B. Now, just like I gave the audience member the permission to do what they wanted with the Bobo doll, Marina Abramovic gave the control to the public to do what they wanted to her as an artistic experiment called Rhythm Zero. With a sign saying that she'd take full responsibility, she set up a table with 72 objects, ranging from feathers, grapes, and honey to knives, guns, whips. You can even see an axe on the corner of that table. For 6 hours, she would bear witness to the relationship between the artist and the audience. During the first 3 hours, her clothes were cut off. The initially tentative audience became more violent and aggressive with the passing time. And they were getting a little bit too comfortable with the negative aspects of the nudging. At some point, some of their skin was slit and an audience member sipped on that blood. The most prominent moment recognizable in Rhythm Zero was when an audience loaded a gun and pointed it at her head. That was when the other members of the audience made factions fighting against it. Some of the audience would divide into those that would protect her, while some would instead try to only incite more violence. Regardless of which divide the audience was on though, as soon as the artist became a real person walking towards them and releasing herself from that objectification, everyone from that gallery fled. I don't think I need to spell out what was so unethical in this act. These adults had both positive and negative nudging, unlike the option I gave where I only gave that toy hammer. And even then, they acted so violently towards Marina. This leads us to the concept of utilitarianism. Such a fancy word, but what does it even mean? When we say utility in this context, we tend to mean the amount of pleasure, happiness, or satisfaction that is derived from an action or an object. And utilitarianism essentially says that a good action will maximize utility and minimize the harm or suffering for all parties involved. Emotions again, how lovely. There are two types of utilitarianism, and this will come handy in just a bit. Act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism focuses on the maximum utility to be derived from a specific action. Very short term, very one-time situation. You're assessing the ethics involved in that one instance. Rule utilitarianism, on the other hand, focuses on the moral rules. Rule utilitarians will think an action is good if it conforms to a justifiable moral rule. This was initially made to benefit in the long run, but I think now there's a sort of moral conduct around it that we define as the law. Let me show you a flow chart just so that you can understand the situation a little better. Ah, nice. It's already there. So we essentially have this situation of tax evasion over here. An act utilitarian would choose the short-term option of instead of focusing on how tax evasion can actually harm the society in the long run, it will instead focus on the short-term benefits of helping others through tax evasion for charity. By breaking the law, though, the rule utilitarian would argue against that, as shown over there. Though the rule utilitarian can tend to be a little inflexible, there's a sort of blind conformity that comes with only following moral conduct without questioning or doubting yourself at times. Maybe because of the lack of consequence anyway, or maybe because of the lack of proper awareness towards that harm. Without that questioning, though, some people tend to think that there are no moral rules, that since there are no moral rules, they can do whatever they want. Rhythm Zero and the Bobo doll experiment are similar in their nature of ethics, but for different reasons. The actions of Rhythm Zero's audience and Albert didn't really go beyond the standard of ethics during that short time frame. Still, Albert was just operating within the standard of ethics at the time, not intentionally wanting to harm those children, but just not operating under a stricter standard that we have today. It was more of a lack of awareness rather than wanting to hurt someone. However, the audience that harmed Marina were fully aware of what could occur and they just didn't care. They had a lack of consequence during the act. It was only during the end, when Marina walked toward them, that they were confronted by that consequence. There's clearly a problem occurring here. We aren't questioning our beliefs enough. We aren't asking where we learned that moral conduct from. We aren't questioning the emotions or the bloodshed that happened to make those rules in the first place. We're getting too comfortable with our emotions of desire, and it's leading us to inertia. The don't fix what's not broken mentality is really starting to become a little broken here. Maybe we won't know the answer for certain. Ethics as we know it is a concept we made up for the sake of social merit. There won't be one clear answer, period. But that doesn't mean we don't stop searching for what we can do better in our society. It doesn't mean when we stop searching for a world that we want to live in. For centuries, there have been, forget that slide. There have been wars, politics, and discrimination because people in power have been searching for what brought them satisfaction. But we don't have to do that. We can and should do better as a society when we're low and when others are hurting. So do you want to be the person who hurt the artist, or do you want to be the person who protected her? Thank you.